Hello and welcome to Challenge Solutions. My name is Caitlyn and this is the second episode in the series on Voiceover for iOS. Today I will be going through the Voiceover settings menu and explaining the functionality of each setting. Okay, if you are watching the video, you should be looking at a screen recording of my iPad now. We are currently on the VoiceOver settings screen that we accessed in the previous video in this series. If you missed the introduction to VoiceOver for iOS and you want to see that, it will be linked in the description below. Today we are going to look at a few basic settings. I'm primarily going to focus on the speech and audio settings in this video because I'm going to be doing tutorials on specific aspects of the settings screen in the future, but I am also going to scroll through this entire settings panel and give you kind of a brief overview of what things are and point out a few miscellaneous things that people tend to miss that can be very helpful if you are a beginner voiceover user or if you're a TVI trying to teach a beginning voiceover user. We're going to start by looking at the speech settings and voice settings. I am going to skip over the stuff at the top of the settings screen that has the voiceover gesture explanations and the voiceover practice button. We're going to go straight to speech rate. So I'm going to swipe right because I'm already there.
Speaking rate, heading.
You heard voiceover say speaking rate heading. We'll swipe right again.
Speaking rate, 60%. Adjustable.
You heard voiceover say speaking rate, 60% adjustable. This is where you can adjust the speed at which voiceover speaks. You can do this by swiping up and down with one finger. I typically keep voiceover somewhere between 75 and 100% because I am a fluent voiceover user and I like to get information as quickly as possible. I have it slowed down to 60% for these tutorials. By the way, please let me know if this is still too fast. I know it can be difficult to understand if you are new to voiceover and it's at a faster rate. So tell me if I need to slow things down or speed things up in the comments. I will now swipe up and down on this to demonstrate how it works. I'm using one finger on the adjustable item.
70%, 80%, 90%, 100%.
That's at 100%. We'll swipe left so you can hear it speak a sentence.
Speaking rate, heading. Speaking rate, 100%. Adjustable.
Now we're back on the adjuster, so we'll swipe down with one finger.
90%, 80%, 70%, 60%.
We're back at 60%. You can hear that it's going down by 10% every time. I'm going to swipe right now.
Speech, button.
We'll double tap this to open the speech settings.
Voiceover, back button.
This is the speech settings screen. I'm going to swipe right with one finger.
Speech, heading, voice, Samantha, button.
Here you can change your voiceover voice.
Speech, back button. English, heading, English, us, heading.
You heard it say English US heading. That means that all the voices below this heading are English US speaking voices. I am going to give you a brief demonstration of how you can play a sample of each voice and switch to those voices. I typically use the Alex voice, so that is what we are going to switch it to today. I have it set to Samantha right now because Samantha is the default voice and I wanted this tutorial to be as true to the sort of default experience as it could be without me factory resetting my device. So we're going to swipe right to Alex and I will show you how you can play a sample and switch to that voice.
Alex, button.
We'll double tap.
Setting, English, back button.
This is the settings screen for the Alex voice. We'll swipe right.
Alex, heading. Edit, button. Alex, using 869 MB. Actions available.
You heard it say it's using 869 megabytes. Alex is a very large voice file because it is a super enhanced high quality voice and it takes up a lot of storage on your device. To me, it is worth the sacrifice of storage to have the better voice. I particularly like Alex when I'm like reading a Kindle book and things like that because it's just a clearer, better experience in my opinion. But if you do have less storage on your device, I wouldn't recommend switching to that one. Maybe stick with the enhanced Samantha voice, which is what we're using now. We'll swipe right again.
Speak sample, button. Actions available.
You heard it say speak sample. If we double tap this, it will play a sample in the Alex voice. So we'll do that now.
Hello, My name is Alex.
And of course, you just heard it demonstrate the Alex voice, so you can do that with all of the voices on that voice screen. I'm going to switch to the Alex voice for the duration of this tutorial because that is what I typically use, and you can see the difference in voices. So to do that, we'll go back to where it said Alex using 869 megabytes.
Alex, using 869 MB.
And double tap.
Selected. Alex, using 869 megabytes.
And you can hear that we have now switched to the Alex voice. We're going to go back to the speech settings now. So to do that, I will scrub on the screen with 2 fingers. It's a quick up and down scrub gesture. Again, this was explained in the previous video, so you can check the description if you want to see my gesture overview.
Speech. Back button.
This is the voice screen. So again, you can scroll through here and play with each of the voices just as we did. I'm going to 2 finger scrub again to go back to the speech settings.
Speech. Heading.
We're now back on the speech settings screen. We're going to continue to go through this, and I will give you an overview of the rest of the settings on this screen.
Voice. Alex. Button.
That's where we just were to change the voice. We'll swipe right again.
Pronunciations. Button.
Here you can change how VoiceOver pronounces certain words. The more you use VoiceOver, the more you'll notice that it can pronounce certain words rather strangely, especially if they're kind of uncommon words. If you want to go correct those, you can do so in this section of the speech settings. It is fairly self-explanatory to do, so I'm not going to go into that today. I don't typically change pronunciations very often unless it's a word that really bugs me that I'm going to encounter on the regular. I usually just figure out what the word is and get used to VoiceOver saying it the way it says it because it's not worth the effort of changing the pronunciation if it doesn't bother me that much and I'm not going to see it on a regular basis. We'll swipe right again.
Pitch. Heading.
And again.
Pitch. 50%. Adjustable.
There you can hear that it gave you the pitch percentage. You can make VoiceOver have a higher or lower pitch. You adjust this the same way you did the speech rate by swiping up or down with 1 finger. I always just leave mine on the default at 50%, but if you want to, you can adjust that. We'll swipe right again with 1 finger.
Use pitch change. On.
Use pitch change means that VoiceOver will use a higher or lower pitch depending on the context of what you are doing. For instance, when you're typing, if you are typing in uppercase letters, it will use a higher pitch when it speaks the letter. And when you are deleting text, it will change its pitch as well. I keep that on. It's on by default, and I just keep it on because it's a good way of keeping track of what you're doing with text editing especially. So we'll swipe right again with 1 finger.
Detect languages. On.
Detect languages means that VoiceOver will detect the language on the screen and adjust accordingly. We'll swipe right again.
VoiceOver will switch voices when text in another language is detected.
You just heard it give you the explanation of the detect languages setting. We'll swipe right again.
Rotor languages. Heading.
And again.
Add new language. Button.
That is something that we will cover in a future video in this series, the rotor. But essentially, if you add languages to your rotor, you can switch languages on the fly. For instance, if you're bilingual or you read or write in different languages and you need to switch them quickly, that's a way to do that. But we will discuss that in a future video because the rotor is a somewhat complex aspect of VoiceOver. So we'll swipe right again with 1 finger.
Add new language. Button.
You can hear that that's the bottom of the speech settings. So we're going to go back to the main settings screen with a 2 finger scrub.
Voice accessibility. Back button.
Okay, we're back on the main VoiceOver settings screen. So we're going to swipe right from the speech button.
Verbosity. Button.
And we'll double tap to open the Verbosity settings screen.
VoiceOver. Back button.
This screen has a lot of controls that will basically affect how VoiceOver navigates and reads certain elements. We'll swipe through it.
Verbosity. Heading. Punctuation. Button.
That will allow you to control how much punctuation VoiceOver speaks when it is reading.
Customize how punctuation is output.
You just heard it say that you can customize how punctuation is output. That's the explanation of those settings. We'll swipe right again.
Speak hints. Off.
Speak hints could be beneficial if you are a beginner VoiceOver user. Basically, if you turn this on, VoiceOver will tell you how to interact with items on the screen. For instance, if we toggle it on, it'll tell you to double tap to activate. It basically explains the gestures that you can perform to interact with certain items.
Capital letters. Speak cap. Button.
That affects how VoiceOver interacts with capital letters. I have it set to speak cap. I believe you can also set it to change pitch, but I prefer it to say like cap A, cap B. We'll swipe right again.
Deleting text. Change pitch. Button.
I have mine set to change pitch when you delete text, but you can change it to do other things when you're deleting. We'll swipe right again.
Embedded links. Speak. Button.
I have it set to say link when a link is embedded. We'll go right again.
Speak detected text and images. Speak. Button.
This says speak detected text in images, this will basically let VoiceOver detect text in a picture if it can, and it will read it. Say if you've got a picture that someone took of a page or a screenshot, if VoiceOver can detect text in it, it will read it.
Table output. Heading.
This controls how VoiceOver reads tables, so I'll swipe quickly through the settings.
Table headers. On. Row and column numbers. On. Determines whether this information is output when navigating tables.
And as you heard, you can set it to read row and column headers and things like that. I have those turned on because it just helps me keep track of where I am in tables. We'll go right again.
Rotor actions. Heading. Speak confirmation. On. Speak emojis. On. Emoji suffix. Off. Speaks the word emoji when emoji are read in text content.
As you heard, that controls how VoiceOver reads emojis. If you turn on the emoji suffix, it will say emoji before it gives you the description of the emoji. If you were not aware, VoiceOver reads descriptions of emojis. For instance, it will say face with tears of joy or smiling face with squinting eyes. And if you turn that on, it will say emoji, face with tears of joy.
Media descriptions. Off. Button. Determines how closed captions plus SDH are output during media playback.
If you turn those on, VoiceOver will read closed captions. That's the bottom of this settings screen, so we will two-finger scrub to go back to the VoiceOver settings.
Verb accessibility. Back button.
Okay, we're back on the VoiceOver settings screen, so we will swipe right again from Verbosity.
Braille. Focus 40BT. E3BC91F3. Button.
Those are the settings for an external Braille display and Braille screen input. I'm not going to open those today because I'm going to do a separate video on using Braille with iOS, but you just heard it say that my Focus 40 Braille display is connected. If that is a video that you need, drop me a comment below and I will prioritize that in my VoiceOver tutorial series. Otherwise, if you're watching this way later in the future, I've probably already covered it, and there's a playlist in the description of this video that you can click and it will show you all the VoiceOver for iOS videos, and it will probably be in there somewhere. But I am going to do a video on using Braille screen input, which is where you type Braille on the touchscreen, and using an external Braille display. For now, we're going to swipe right again.
Audio. Button.
We are going to look at the audio settings, so I'll double tap to open that.
Sounds. VoiceOver. Back button.
We're on the audio settings screen now. We're going to swipe right.
Audio. Heading. Sounds. Button.
You've probably noticed that VoiceOver makes little clicks and flips and things like that as sound effects as you're doing things on the screen. This is where you can turn those on and off. I'm going to double tap on the sounds button to show you the sounds panel. You can control what sound effects that VoiceOver does and does not make.
Sound. Audio. Back button.
You can also just toggle them all off. Personally, I keep the sounds turned off because I find that it is a faster experience. I have them enabled right now because they're enabled by default, and I wanted to make this as true to the default experience as I could for beginners. I am going to turn them off for the rest of this tutorial though, so that you can hear the difference. A lot of people like the sound effects because it helps them have context for what is happening, especially for like progress counters. If a web page is loading, it clicks. I don't need that. I would rather just have straight speech feedback. I find it's faster and smoother that way. You can also turn certain sound effects on and off on the screen. There are buttons to control what sounds you do and do not hear, but for now we're going to swipe to the toggle.
Sounds. Heading. Sounds. Heading. Sounds. On.
That's the toggle. I'm going to swipe past it a little bit so you can hear all the other things on the screen.
Off.
But we've turned off the sounds, so when I swipe, you will not hear the click.
Interaction. Heading. Item focused. Button.
Here we have all of the things that you can control whether or not you get sound effects for. So we've got item focused,
Item activated. Button.
activated, that's when you double tap.
Navigation wrap backwards. Button. Navigation wrap forwards. Button. Scroll page. Button.
As you can hear, we have a variety of things that we can toggle on and off in terms of sound effects. For now, we're going to go back to the audio settings and look at the rest of the things on that screen.
VoiceOver. Back button.
Now we're back on the audio settings screen. We'll swipe right with one finger.
Audio. Heading. Sounds. Button.
That's where we just were. We'll keep going.
Audio ducking. On.
Audio ducking is a really useful setting. If you are playing, say, music in Spotify or an Audible book and you need to use VoiceOver with audio ducking enabled, the audio of the thing that you're playing, the volume of your book or your music will drop down and VoiceOver will come over it, so it's easier to hear VoiceOver. I believe it's enabled by default. I keep this on because it's a much easier experience to use VoiceOver with that enabled. It also helps if you're, say, in a phone call or a Zoom meeting and you need to do things with VoiceOver without the audio from that call interfering with your speech. We'll swipe right again.
Send to HDMI. Off.
Send to HDMI is pretty much only useful if you're giving a presentation and you need to send your voiceover speech to an HDMI-enabled device.
Any externally connected media devices should be reconnected for this change to take effect.
And you just heard it say that you'll need to reconnect external devices if you need to do that. We'll swipe right again.
Speech channels, ATR2100X USB microphone, heading.
And here's where you can control what audio channel your speech goes to. Right now, my microphone is connected, so that is the name of the device that it gave us. My headphones are plugged into that, so that is where speech is going through. And that is the last thing on the screen, so we'll two-finger scrub to go back to the voiceover settings screen.
Accessibility, back button.
And we'll swipe right from audio.
Commands, button.
I am going to open this, but I'm not going to scroll through the entire screen.
Voiceover, back button.
This screen allows you to control commands for voiceover. So for instance, you can add gestures to do certain things. You can add keyboard shortcuts if you have an external keyboard connected, or braille display shortcuts if you have a braille display connected to make voiceover do certain things. It also lists all of the gestures that can be used with voiceover. So if you want a more complete guide on all the gestures you can do with voiceover than what I gave you in the introductory video, you can come here and see all the commands. So we'll swipe through this really quick.
Commands, heading. All commands, button.
That's where it'll show you all the commands you can do with voiceover.
Touch gestures, button.
We've got touch gestures,
Keyboard shortcuts, button.
keyboard shortcuts.
Commands are prefixed with the voiceover modifier key. Control plus option.
You just heard it say that commands are prefixed with voiceover modifier keys, control and option. That means you'll need to do control and option, hold them down with all the commands that you perform on a Bluetooth keyboard. In the future, I'm going to do tutorials on using a Bluetooth keyboard with iOS if you need more information on that.
Handwriting, button.
You can handwrite with voiceover. I do not, because I am very, very blind and cannot handwrite efficiently. But if you have a little bit of vision or you're used to handwriting, this can be beneficial for you. You can perform commands by writing on the screen.
Braille screen input, button.
Those are commands for Braille screen input, which is where you type Braille on the screen.
Braille devices, heading. Smart Beal B00718, button.
And you can see that it's got my list of Braille displays that are associated with this device. So that's my Smart Beetle. We can do commands for that specifically.
Focus 40BT E3BC91F3, button.
And that's my focus. We can do commands for that too.
Reset voiceover commands, button.
You can reset your commands to default if you mess things up and you need to revert to the default, which is very useful. And that is the bottom of the screen. So we'll two-finger scrub to go back.
Accessibility, back button.
We're going to swipe right from commands now.
Activities, button.
I am not going to touch the activity settings in this tutorial. Basically, that gets into some more advanced things where you can chain different settings together to perform like a chain of actions with one gesture or command. I'm not going to do that in this tutorial because it's a little bit more advanced than what we need to do here. I can do something on it in the future if anyone is interested. We're going to swipe right.
Rotor, button.
This again will be its own tutorial because the rotor is a little bit complex. I believe it is the next tutorial in this series actually. The rotor is a little bit too complex to cover here, but it is very necessary to understand if you're a voiceover user. All voiceover users need to understand the rotor because it greatly enhances the experience of using voiceover.
Rotor actions, button.
That is also associated with the rotor and will be covered in the next video.
Typing, button.
Typing with voiceover is also going to be its own video in this series, so I'm not going to cover those settings here either. But if you need to control aspects of how voiceover handles typing input and things like that, that is where you would go to do it. We'll swipe right again.
Always speak notifications, off.
If you enable that, voiceover will always read any notification that you get. I have it off for obvious reasons. I don't need voiceover spontaneously reading text messages that I get in public places. We will swipe right again.
Navigate images, always, button.
This is where you can control whether or not voiceover navigates images. I have it set to always navigate them. Even if they're inaccessible, I like to know that images are present in case I need to find a way to make them accessible. We'll swipe right again.
Large cursor, off.
If you enable the large cursor, it makes a large cursor. This can be beneficial if you have a little bit of residual vision. We'll swipe right again.
Caption panel, off.
I believe if you enable this, it will put a panel on the screen that says in print what voiceover is saying. So if you're a TVI or a parent trying to teach a beginning voiceover user, this can be useful. I keep this off because sightlings around me don't need to understand voiceover.
Double tap timeout, 0.25 button.
This can also be a very useful setting if you are a beginner voiceover user or teaching a beginner voiceover user. It controls how long between taps. So for example, right now you've got 0.25 seconds between taps for a double tap. If you have some, say, motor issues or anything like that, it can be beneficial to extend this so you have longer to perform both taps in a double tap to activate things. So if you double tap on that, it will open the double tap timeout settings and you can extend that time. Okay, that is the last thing in the voiceover settings. So we are going to have a transition and go back to video of my face for the outro. That concludes this walkthrough of the voiceover settings menu. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. If you watch the YouTube video, don't forget to give the video a thumbs up so the YouTube algorithm continues to know we exist. You can send us a voice message via the Anchor app if you listen to the Challenge Solutions podcast, or send us an email via the contact form on challengesolutions.org. Also, check the description for the associated blog post and some Apple accessibility resources. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in another episode of Challenge Solutions.